Yeah, let me start my presentation with the breaking news that pamphlet, my email address dropped somehow from that. So if you're interested in my email address, please write down. Thank you very much for your cooperation. Thank you very much for your kindness. My name is Takuya Kubo, associate professor at Kanazawa University, and this is the 5th time I came here. And I'm not sure if somebody remembers this. Yeah, this is 13 years ago that I bought this when everything was much cheaper than they are now. So, okay. My presentation, my title is Biocultural Reading of Huckleberry Finn, Huck's Oscillation between Body, Thought, and American Dichotomies. And actually, I really like the act of interpretation. And I decided when I applied for this conference that I go back to what I like. And what I like to interpret, and that I never get tired of doing so again and again, is the interpretation of Huckleberry Finn. And the argument today is, today I want to talk about 3 questions that have haunted me since I was a graduate student, long time ago. Questions about adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Question 1, why does Huck keep going off alone to think? Question 2, if he can think for himself, why is he still so obedient? Question 3, why does he seem to hand the reins of his own thinking over to Tom Sawyer after chapter 31? My approach here is biocultural interpretation. Leonard Davis, writing on also biocultures from the perspective of disability studies, argues in his Biocultural Manifesto that all branches of knowledge interpret. Biological responses of the body and cultural norms, in other words, can be read on the same interpretive ground. I use this framework because I do not want to decide in advance whether mind moves body or the other way around. In chapters 16 and 31, the order reverses. If I reduce it to one direction, I will lose the other. Nancy Easterlin goes further. She writes, a feeling is not only necessary and prior to all action, including mental action, but the basis of reasoned decisions. I myself not fully convinced that feeling always comes first. This presentation follows the scenes in which Huck thinks to see how and in what order this claim is written into one boy's body and mind. Chapter 31, as everybody here knows, has generated an enormous body of scholarship, which I cannot survey today. I will limit myself to one thing, the scenes where Huck goes off alone to think. My claim, in brief, Huck's thinking always begins under compulsion from the body, in a solitude that is never actually complete. And at the moment his thinking peaks in chapter 31, he hands its reins over to Tom. I think Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is a story about who holds authority over the boy, about whose authority Huck actually obeys. Tom Sawyer, the Widow Douglas, Miss Watson, Sunday school, church, his own violent father, Pap, and 2 confidence men, all of them, in turn, act as authorities over Huck. He resists them, but he also adapts to them, with remarkable docility. Reading the novel, we run into several scenes where Huck pulls away from everyone else, just in order to think by himself. I want to focus on two of them in chapter 3 and 6, before Huck encounters Jim on Jackson's Island. In both, the place he goes is the woods. In chapter 3, we watch two women, both authoritative figures for Huck, each teaching him about the further authority above them. Miss Watterson scolds him and tells him that prayer will get him anything he wants. Huck tries it and gets nothing. Widow Douglas doesn't scold him, but she, too, insists on importance of prayer from a different angle, that what praying gets him is spiritual things, gifts. Unable to reconcile the two, Huck goes back into the woods alone to think. His thinking here casts real doubt on the usefulness of prayer, but two things emerge that matter for my later argument. First, solitary thought does not actually work. Even alone, Huck's head is full of other people's voices. Here, the two women's. He wants to be alone in order to think, but he can never quite manage that. Second, there's a question of oneness and two-ness. Miss Watterson and the widow both preach one single providence, but Huck concludes, I judged I could see that there were two providences, and sides with the widows. This choice between the two is the seed. This choice of between two is the seed of something. The novel returns to again and again. Here in chapter 3, it resolves gently. The two are simply allowed to exist at the same time. Let me turn to chapter 6. Here we see first case where physical confinement controls Huck's thought. What we witness is an escalating struggle over authority. Pep, wanting Huck's money, turns the struggle violent and legal. He kidnaps his own son and locks him in a cabin across the state line. Huck adapts to this environment with striking flexibility, or rather docility. He tolerates life with a violent father, and even resists returning to his old, more civilized life. But when Pep disappears for days, leaving him locked in alone, Huck cannot stand the solitude any longer. He decides he has to break out. Physical confinement forces his mind into thought. Let me call it the bodily dichotomy between civility and brutality, and they move his mind for the first time. In chapter 3, we saw multiple voices shared one head. Here, Huck's body is physically confined, and that condition drives him back into the woods to think after he's temporarily released from it. Yet his judgment doesn't resolve the dichotomy. It leads instead to escape from both situations. Through this difference, the biological side of bodily a bodily reaction and the cultural side of a socially embedded mind, Huck appears here as a genuinely biocultural being. Up to this point, what has forced Huck's body and mind has always come from outside him, mainly the two men and the pup. What changes from chapter 16 onward is that this force moves inside him. Miss Watson, though she is no longer there, now speaks to Huck from within his own head. Let's move to chapter 16. Conscience commands and the body resists. Here Huck becomes aware of a decisive rift between his mind and his body. Between his own head, we might say, and the actions and the words that head can no longer control. As Carol, the gateway to free state, gets closer, Jim starts telling Huck about his hopes for freedom and his plans to buy back or steal his wife and children. But as Jim's freedom starts to look real, close, almost within his reach, the moment carries two entirely different meanings at once. Jim said it made him all over trembly and feverishly to be so close to freedom. Well, I can tell you it made me all over trembly and feverish too, to hear him, because I began to get it through my head that he was most free. And who was to blame for it? Why, me. I couldn't get that out of my conscience, no how or no way. Huck comes to realize in an entirely bodily way, by trembling and becoming feverish, exactly what he has been committing. He is complicit in something that shakes the very foundation of the antebellum South's most basic institution. This novel, in part, is a contest over who gets to hold authority over Huck's mind or his body. Jim never seeks that authority, though, but his words unmistakably shake Huck's mind through Huck's body. Huck summons something he calls conscience, written into his own mind, and begins to put himself on trial. This anticipates the very particular trial he will conduct against himself in chapter 31. Conscience says to me, what had poor Miss Watson done to you that you could treat her so mean? Why, she tried to learn you your book. She tried to learn you your manners. She tried to be good to you every way she knowed how. That's what she done. Huck calls this what comes of not thinking, but that may not be right. He arrives at this point through the bodily experience of his own imprisonment. Here, though, it is the body, not the mind, that moves first toward a conclusion. He paddles out alone in his canoe and works out a plan to turn Jim in. But Jim's voice keeps sounding physically in his head, breaking the solitary thought. His head toward the two white men, being asked whether the man on the raft is white or black. Huck cannot produce the right answer. Feeling, bodily felt, blocks conscience from carrying out its own command. Here is the first oscillation between conscience and feeling. Then Huck, having given up on thinking, lets his body act, and tells the lie we all know. He's white. Here's a quotation. After that, I know very well I had done wrong, and I see it were no use for me to try to learn to do right. He accepts that he is, in fact, a criminal. But this comes from a split between mind and body, the body refusing the mind's authority. The verdict that arises from the body here in chapter 16 is one he will try to reach consciously and face to face in chapter 31. Chapter 31 may probably be the most famous scene in this novel, and it has generated debate for as long as the novel has been read. Huck discovers that the two con men they picked up along the river have sold him. These two, incidentally, also belong to the category of people fighting for authority over Huck. Huck returns once again to the wigwam on the raft to think alone. This time, something is different. He hasn't chosen solitude. Jim has been taken from him, and now he really is alone. His mind works with total intensity, intensifying the self-prosecuting trial that chapter 16 already anticipated. What makes this trial unusual is that Huck is the one who brings a charge, and Providence is the very judge who tries him. Providence appears here as the strongest authority over Huck, but what this trial actually shows is not the authority controlling the body. It's that very authority being refused. At the very moment its voice glows loudest. He tries to pray, yet the words will not come. Before judgment finds speech or its voice, the body has already delivered its verdict. Huck thinks till he wears his head sore, nothing comes to his mind. What comes instead is the whole journey with Jim down the river, memory after memory of Jim. He finds himself alone and also unable to be alone. His head fills, as before, with many voices: Tom, Miss Watson, Jim, Sunday school, and at last he recognizes the one who has always watched him from up there, Providence. What we see here is, in a sense, the reverse of chapter 16. He trembles at the horror of what he's done. He moves his body. He kneels down in order to pray, and no words come out from his mouth. This time, it is his own body that fails to produce a word. Robbed of the spoken language that has carried him this far, Huck now writes a letter to Miss Watson, a confession in effect. He believes that once it's written, he will finally be able to pray. But he doesn't move to prayer right away. Once more, he turns to thinking. Into that head, full of so many voices, comes now Jim's voice. Jim, who called Huck the only friend he had and who has shown him nothing but kindness, faced once again with a choice between two things. Huck decides to defy the society he lives and save Jim. There are two kinds of things in a Huck's head. One's conscience, written in by social norm, and religion. The other is judgment, held up by memory and feeling from the journey itself. In chapter 16, conscience issued the command, while judgment resisted through bodily feeling. In chapter 31, the process is reversed. The voice of conscience reaches its loudest point. Only then does judgment finally become speech. Mind does not control body here, nor the other way round. This may be a time lag between them, but the two remain inseparable. The ceaseless oscillation between conscience and judgment is my answer to the reservation I raised about Easterlin at the start. Feeling does not always come before action, but feeling remains unmistakably the ground of reasoned decision. Let me return to close to the three questions I opened with. Why does he think alone? His thinking always begins under compulsion from the body's side, driven into the woods, locked in the cabin, seized by trembling and fever. Why is he so obedient? Not because his will is weak, but because his one head keeps more than one authority living in it, side by side. He cannot be alone even in solitude. And why does he hand the reins of his thinking power over to Tom? In chapter 31, he recognizes the voices in his head into a courtroom, and becomes at once plaintiff, defendant, with providence presiding over the trial. That is the peak of his thinking. But the burden of sitting in judgment on himself is not something he will bear twice. In the same moment that Jim is put into physical cell, Huck walks into another one, a cell called Tom Sawyer. The boy who was locked in Pup's cabin in chapter 6 ends by locking himself in. Whether this reading really holds and how we should judge what follows from chapter 32 onward has been debated since Hemingway and Will. And what I've offered today is a hypothesis. Thank you very much for your listening.